Today we're wrapping up with a film called The Spoils.
NBA Summer League Film Festival. Let's go!
Let's bring out the director of The Spoils,
Mike Nicoll.
The desire that I had to tell a really unique story that hadn't been seen before. I wanted to tell a definitive story about the business of American basketball.
What's amazing about what he's documented is he found the perfect moment. So all those things are factoring in to the culture of American basketball right now.
We talk in the film about how Michael Jordan, he is obviously the largest example of the merging of a human being with a brand. Today, everyone has their own personal brand, right? Like, Matt, what's your brand?
Still struggling to find that out.
Hey, everybody,
Mike, Todd,
let's give it up for our panel.
The process of unraveling that story in combination with the real life events just kind of piled on itself and incentivized us to just keep going and keep going. And the result is a film that I think is unlike any basketball documentary that's ever been made.
So what you're telling us is you were prescient enough to see the Supreme Court ruling and NIL coming 10 years before it happened.
Well, no, but what I am telling you, though, is that one of my central theses was always that, for so long, for decades, the question was, should college athletes get paid?
Sure.
And for myself, having spent my entire life traveling through the American basketball system as a player myself, high school, college, I knew that the sort of professional party is over for the blue chip guys long before they ever step foot on a college campus.
Right.
So that was one of the things I wanted to demonstrate.
What's amazing about what he's documented is he found the perfect moment of, if it was filmed over 10 years, the first 5 years was how it was done, over the past 35 years. Now in the most recent years, it's still going, it's still evolving. And really that's interesting in terms of, just the opportunities these student athletes have, how the industry is changing, not just at the professional level or grassroots level, but even at the collegiate level. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg right now, what we're seeing.
Hundreds of thousands of families churn through this system every year. And having spent over a decade in this space, you hear a lot of parents in these gyms towards the end of their tenure mutter something along the lines of, I wish I knew then what I know now. But it's not only the people that are looking to commodify or leverage your son, but it's also the infrastructure that's grown up around it. And I think that, the third act of our film gets into a little bit of more like what I would call the soul of the game. But I'm a big proponent of the idea that there can only be one main thing. And for a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, I think most of us can agree that the main thing should be falling in love with the game, getting better, putting that at the center of your life.
Well, and growing as a person.
And as a human being. We touch a little bit on this sort of emotional and human development, but the reality is whether it is brand building, NIL deals, exposure, social media following, jumping around from team to team, depending on where I can get the most exposure. There are so many things inside of this infrastructure that are competing with the game itself to be the main thing. The value proposition of our film, I think, is as a navigational blueprint because it does have to happen at a family level, that discipline and that identification of what our target is.
There's such an emphasis on the sport itself that they become defined by that at an early age.
And part of that problem is the way you phrased it. They become defined by that, not necessarily even defining themselves. Someone else has said, you're a pro prospect, you're going to be in this system, here's how it's going to go.
Yeah, I think on a human development level, which I'm glad to hear you picked up on, I would say that the system we've built encourages what I might call a single dimension identity, which, all of us at various stages on our own life journey, I think all understand that we're all very multi-dimensional. But when you are inside of a system that only identifies you as having value in this one way, I think that can be a really blinding, debilitating, self-conception also. When I pay attention to the conversation in the sort of basketball community about where we are in the American basketball system writ large, I hear a lot of get the bag, chase the money. I don't hear almost anybody talking about what might be considered more traditionalist or purist ideas, but putting the game, your development, and again, we talk about it here towards the end, but like, I think one of the lasting legacies of AAU is the way that it's really individualized, a beautiful team game. And, Todd, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, but like, the paradox of asking a prospect to be part of something bigger than themselves, and that actually buying into it's not about me, actually being better for their game and where they're ultimately going to go. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, the instinct is to put your hands on the wheel and make it about me, but I don't think that's actually the winning formula.
It's a balance, because
Right.
you bring up a good point. Like, to find success, in some ways you do need to be, I hate to use the word selfish, but you need to be focused on yourself in terms of your development, but you still need to do that within the team concept or framework. But that's where good coaching, good mentorship comes into play to find that balance.
Your lead character, Etop, the coach of the Compton Magic, is a lot of things. He's a brash guy. He's a salesman. He's a self-promoter. He's an advocate for his players. This may not be a binary choice, so it might not be a simple answer for you, but is he the hero or the villain of this film?
I get asked this question, or a version of it, fairly often. You'd be really shocked. It's pretty split down the middle, 50-50. And in the filmmaking world, that's because we say half the story takes place on the screen, the other half takes place inside the audience's brain. And so much of their response to him is based on the audience's relationship to the Etop of their lives, if you will. I will say that from a directing standpoint, I was never particularly concerned with whether he was likable or unlikable. What I knew was that Etop was one of the most powerful people in this space. And so from a storytelling standpoint, I saw my job as to put his power and his influence on the screen in an honest way. And it's not a binary good or bad, hero or villain. He's just very powerful.
To me, that's the question. How many AAU coaches or directors truly understand the business from top down, right, or from bottom up? Etop, I would say, is the closest thing to Sonny Vaccaro that we have in the current basketball landscape at the grassroots level.
What surprised you over the course of the decade plus?
That's a great question. I will say that post-Supreme Court decision, NIL, I had an expectation or an assumption maybe that like people would be more willing to talk about the business dynamics of this world, because now what used to was formerly illegal is now legal. I would say that people were not more inclined to talk about it on the other side. And I have some thoughts about why that is. At the end of the day, the infrastructure in this world is kind of built around what I like to call juice proximity. And I think part of the reason that people are still kind of gun-shy to talk about what really makes this world go round is that there is this sort of like instinctive understanding that what makes it go round is identifying and attaching and anointing and monetizing a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid at its baseline level, right? We can talk about, it's America, it's capitalism. I ultimately think that like the right blueprint has to be chosen by the family, because like our film is certainly not here to say don't get the money. I think we definitely are advocating for some more balance. But the honest answer to your question is, I would have expected people to be like, oh, everything's legal now. There's, it's all out in the open. People still don't like talking about this stuff.
It's still taboo to a certain degree, right, in terms of the landscape, because I could tell you, being on the ground floor of it, it's still the wild, wild west. Like, people, I don't think, even with the Supreme Court ruling, you're still dealing with different jurisdictions in different states, different state laws. In some cases, Class B felonies in certain states. So navigating those waters, the reality is some families don't know what they don't know. Like, there's an education component that comes along with it. And I could tell you, even having some conversations with college programs, they're asking me questions about how they could best serve their student athletes, whether it be in the transfer portal or even through NIL, and giving ideas, because a lot of those ideas are coming from the NBA level. Everyone says NIL is marketing, at the NBA level, right? Name, image, likeness. So there's a lot of synergy there that we're shedding light on, but the challenge again is when you're dealing with high school and collegiate athletes and different state laws, there's still some gray area in the space.
I think that any sort of like reimagining of the American basketball system has to start with an honest inventory of where we're at. And I think that in many ways, the business has at least taken equal footing to the game as a priority for now multiple generations of young kids.
Absolutely.
But going back to the grassroots level of those shoe companies, they're a major player and politically could influence where a player could end up both collegiately and where they ultimately are drafted.
The shoe companies have always been really savvy about understanding that these kids are extraordinarily powerful salesmen within their own communities at a really young age. I think most kids, they'll watch the game and they'll say, oh, I want to be like Kobe, or I want to be like LeBron, or I want to be like Giannis or Steph. But just as much as that, those 12, 13-year-old kids want to be like the best player at their school. The shoe companies understand that having the best, the highest ranked guys at 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade wearing your shoes matters, period. So for American basketball players to spend basically a decade in this system and then take a one-year apprenticeship or moonlight, wherever, and one and done, they've got 10 years of habits baked in, both in terms of like how they're going to play the game and then also like how they approach it off the court, on the court, what they're in it for, et cetera. But I don't think that the American system prepares these guys for what's right outside that door.
No, I
personally.
think it's actually getting worse because now with the transfer portal, anytime there's adversity, I could just pack my bags and leave,
Gone.
right? And then continue to do that. And then you add compensation on top of that, that's taking precedence over the life skills that you could learn from that coach or that program, or even education that you could gain from that institution. So if you could take that and compound it with everything else that's happening on the grassroots level, that's a recipe for disaster in terms of the development of American players in basketball, in my opinion.